The wedding vows were still fresh on her lips when Arya Bennett discovered the truth. She wasn't a bride, she was collateral. Standing in that cheap community hall, champagne warm in her hand, she overheard her new husband laughing on the phone with his ex-girlfriend about how easily he'd fooled her. But the real nightmare was just beginning. Because Marcus Chen hadn't just broken her heart, he'd sold her soul to pay a debt to the most dangerous crime family in the city. And now, a man in a perfectly tailored suit was offering her the one thing nobody else would, a way out. If you want to see how Arya transforms from a betrayed bride into something far more powerful, stay until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights of the Riverside Community Hall buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over the reception that was supposed to mark the beginning of Arya Bennett's new life. Instead, it felt like a funeral. She stood near the refreshment table, her fingers wrapped around a plastic champagne flute filled with discount sparkling wine. The dress she wore, purchased secondhand from a thrift store in the warehouse district, hung slightly loose around her shoulders. She'd lost weight in the weeks leading up to today, too anxious to eat, too consumed by the desperate hope that marriage might finally be her escape. 23 years old, and Arya had spent most of them invisible. Invisible to her mother, who died when she was 12, leaving her with a father who preferred whiskey to parenting. Invisible to her teachers, who'd seen just another poor kid destined for nowhere. Invisible to everyone except Marcus Chen, who'd walked into the diner where she worked 6 months ago and looked at her like she was someone worth saving. "Beautiful ceremony," Mrs. Kowalski said, adjusting her thick glasses as she approached with a paper plate loaded with budget hors d'oeuvres. The elderly woman lived in Arya's apartment building and had been one of the few guests invited. "You look lovely, dear." "Thank you," Arya managed, though the smile felt painted on. Her eyes drifted across the sparse crowd, maybe 30 people scattered across a room designed for 200. Marcus's friends clustered near the makeshift bar, their expensive suits and designer watches completely out of place in this shabby venue. They'd made jokes about the location during the ceremony, jokes Marcus had laughed at a little too easily. Her new husband stood near the exit, phone pressed to his ear, his back turned to the entire reception. He'd been on that call for 15 minutes now, and something in Arya's chest tightened with each passing second. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Kowalski asked, concern creasing her weathered face. "Just tired," Arya lied. "It's been a long day." It had been a short courtship, 6 weeks from their first date to today. Marcus had been charming, persistent, generous in ways that had made Arya's breath catch. He'd taken her to restaurants where the menus didn't list prices, bought her gifts she'd been too proud to accept until he'd insisted. He'd told her she deserved better than 14-hour shifts at a greasy diner, better than her studio apartment with the broken heater and the neighbor who screamed at all hours. "Marry me," he'd said 3 weeks ago, over Italian food she couldn't pronounce. "Let me take care of you." And she'd said yes because the alternative was returning to a life of scrambling for rent money, of waking up at 4 in the morning to open the diner, of pretending the exhaustion didn't make her bones ache. She'd said yes because Marcus Chen represented stability, security, a future that didn't involve counting pennies and skipping meals. But now, watching him on that phone call, his shoulders tense and his voice too low to hear, doubt crept through her like ice water in her veins. "Excuse me," Arya murmured to Mrs. Kowalski, setting down her champagne flute with fingers that trembled slightly. She moved through the sparse crowd, her cheap heels clicking against the scuffed linoleum floor. Someone had attempted to decorate. White streamers hung from the ceiling tiles, and grocery store flowers sat in mason jars on each table. But it all felt hollow, a performance of happiness that nobody truly believed. Marcus's friends fell silent as she approached, their conversations dying mid-sentence. One of them, Tyler something, she'd met him once, looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Have you seen Marcus?" she asked, though she could see him through the propped-open exit door, still on his phone in the parking lot. "He stepped out," Tyler said, exchanging a glance with the others. "Important call." "On our wedding day?" Tyler's expression flickered. "Yeah, listen, Arya..." But she was already moving toward the exit, toward the cool October air and the sound of Marcus's voice drifting in from outside. "Don't worry about it," Marcus was saying, his tone lighter than she'd heard all day. Everything went exactly as planned. Arya paused just inside the doorway, hidden by shadows and the angle of the door. I know, Marcus continued, laughing now. You should see this place. It's pathetic, but it's done, and that's what matters. A pause. Of course I don't love her, Rachel. Jesus, she was convenient, that's all. Desperate enough to say yes without asking too many questions. The world tilted sideways. Arya's hand shot out, gripping the doorframe for support. Her lungs had forgotten how to work. Her heart. She couldn't feel it anymore, couldn't feel anything except the cold spreading through her chest like frost. The debt's covered now, Marcus said. Or it will be once I finalize the transfer. She doesn't know about any of it, and she never will. By the time she figures out something's wrong, it'll be too late for her to do anything about it. Laughter. Casual, unbothered laughter. Yeah, I'll come over tomorrow. Tonight I have to play the devoted husband, but after that? His voice dropped to something intimate, something that made Arya's stomach turn. I'm all yours, baby, just like always. She didn't remember moving, but suddenly she was outside, standing in the harsh glare of the parking lot security lights. Marcus turned, phone still pressed to his ear, and for a split second his expression went blank. Then he smiled, that same charming smile that had convinced her to say yes. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, then ended the call. Hey, what are you doing out here? You should be inside with our guests. Our guests? Arya's voice came out strange, distant. How many of them actually came for me, Marcus? His smile wavered. What? I heard you. The words emerged steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. I heard everything you just said to Rachel. The smile died completely. For a moment, Marcus just stared at her, calculating. Then his expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. Then I guess we're done pretending, he said flatly. Who is she? Does it matter? You told me... Arya's voice cracked. She forced it steady again. You told me you loved me. I told you what you needed to hear. Marcus pocketed his phone, his movements casual, unbothered by the devastation on her face. You were so eager to believe someone wanted you that you never asked the important questions. What debt? Arya demanded. What did you mean about covering a debt? That's none of your concern. I'm your wife. You're a signature on a marriage license, Marcus corrected. You're collateral, Arya. Leverage. The people I owe don't care about love or loyalty. They care about assets. And now that you're legally tied to me, you're my asset to negotiate with. The parking lot swayed beneath her feet. You married me to use me as what? A bargaining chip? Finally catching on, Marcus checked his watch, the expensive Rolex she'd noticed on their first date. Look, this doesn't have to be complicated. Go back inside, smile pretty for the camera, and let me handle the rest. You'll have a roof over your head and food on the table. That's more than you had before. Something inside Arya, something that had been bending and bowing under the weight of disappointment and poverty and invisibility, finally snapped. No. Marcus blinked. What? I said no. She pulled the thin gold band off her finger, the ring he'd presented with such ceremony 4 hours ago, and threw it at his feet. I want an annulment. This marriage is over before it even started. You think you can just walk away? Marcus's voice dropped to something dangerous. You have no idea what you're involved in now. Then I'll find out. Arya turned, her cheap dress swirling around her legs. But I'm not staying married to someone who only wanted me for leverage. She made it 3 steps before Marcus grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Listen to me very carefully, he hissed, pulling her close. The people I owe? They don't accept annulments. They don't care about your feelings or your pride. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not. Let go of me. Or what? Marcus's grip tightened. You'll scream? Call the police? Tell them your husband of 4 hours isn't the man you thought he was? They'll laugh you out of the station. Arya opened her mouth to respond, but a voice cut through the darkness before she could speak. I believe the lady asked you to let her go. Both of them froze. The voice had come from the shadows at the edge of the parking lot, smooth, cultured, with an edge of steel underneath the politeness. A man stepped into the light, and Arya's breath caught for entirely different reasons than before. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her wages. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and cold beauty. But it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as winter storms and just as merciless. This was not a man you said no to. This was not a man who asked twice. Marcus released Arya's arm immediately, but the fear on his face made something in her stomach drop. "Mr. Salvatore?" Marcus stammered. I wasn't expecting... Clearly." The man, Salvatore, moved closer with the fluid grace of a predator. "Mr. Chen, I came to discuss your outstanding obligation, but I see you've been busy." "What?" "It's handled," Marcus said quickly. "Everything's in place just like I promised." Those storm-gray eyes shifted to Arya, and she felt the weight of their assessment like a physical touch. He was looking at her the way someone might examine a problem, determining its nature and scope. "Is that so?" Salvatore's gaze never left Arya's face. "And does your bride know the specifics of these arrangements?" "She knows enough," Marcus lied. "I know nothing," Arya corrected, finding her voice despite the fear clawing up her throat. "But I know our marriage is over." One dark eyebrow rose fractionally. "Is it?" "Yes." She forced herself to meet those devastating eyes directly. "I don't care what debts he has or what arrangements he made. I'm not part of this." "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Mrs. Chen." The name made her flinch. "It's still Bennett." Was something that might have been amusement flickered across Salvatore's expression. "My apologies, Miss Bennett." He turned his attention back to Marcus, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Chen, I think we need to have a very frank conversation about the terms of your obligation and the consequences of using uninformed third parties as collateral." "She signed the papers," Marcus protested. "The marriage is legal." "Legal and ethical are not always the same thing." Salvatore's voice remained perfectly calm, but something in it made Marcus take a step backward. "You have 1 hour to present yourself at the location my associate will provide. If you're late, or if you attempt to leave the city, the consequences will be severe. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded frantically, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. "Good. Now leave." Salvatore dismissed him with a gesture, the way someone might wave away an insect. For a moment, Marcus hesitated, looking between Arya and the intimidating stranger. Then self-preservation won out, and he practically ran to his car. The engine roared to life seconds later, and then he was gone, taillights disappearing into the October night, leaving Arya alone in a dark parking lot with a man who radiated danger like heat from a furnace. Silence stretched between them. Arya hugged her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold it was, how thin her second-hand dress, how completely out of her depth she'd fallen. "Thank you," she said finally, because manners had been drilled into her from childhood. "For making him leave." "Don't thank me yet, Ms. Bennett." Salvatore studied her with those unnerving eyes. "You don't know who I am." "You're someone Marcus is afraid of," Arya said. "That tells me enough." "Does it?" He tilted his head slightly. "Most people would find that concerning. Most people didn't just discover their husband married them to use as leverage." Arya's laugh came out bitter. "I think my capacity for concern is maxed out right now." To her surprise, Salvatore's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Fair point." He glanced toward the community hall, where music and laughter still drifted out into the night. "Is there anyone in there you need to speak with? Anyone who should know you're leaving?" "Leaving?" Arya blinked. "I'm not... Where would I even go?" "Anywhere but here," Salvatore said simply. "Or did I misunderstand your declaration of wanting an annulment?" "No, you understood correctly, but I can't just disappear. I have a job, an apartment, both of which Marcus knows the locations of." Salvatore's tone remained matter-of-fact, but the implication sent ice down Arya's spine. "And if he's desperate enough to marry you as collateral, he's desperate enough to try using you again. So what am I supposed to do? Go into hiding?" "Yes." The blunt answer shocked her into silence. Salvatore pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then looked back at her. "A car will be here in 3 minutes. I'm offering you protection, Ms. Bennett, but the offer has an expiration time. Once Marcus realizes that his plan has fallen apart, he'll either run or double down. If he chooses the latter, you need to be somewhere he can't reach you. I don't even know you, Arya protested, though the logic of his words was undeniable. My name is Dante Salvatore. I run a significant portion of this city's business operations, both legitimate and otherwise. Your husband owes my organization a considerable amount of money, and he attempted to use you as a guarantee without your knowledge or consent. This offends me on both a professional and personal level. He paused, then added more quietly, I don't make a habit of protecting strangers, Ms. Bennett, but I also don't make a habit of allowing innocent people to be used as pawns. And I'm supposed to trust you? Someone who admits to running illegal operations? No, Dante said simply. You're supposed to make a choice based on very limited options. Trust me or don't. That's your decision. But make it quickly, because in approximately 2 minutes, a black Mercedes will pull into this parking lot, and you'll need to decide if you're getting in it. Arya looked back at the community hall, at the yellow light spilling from the windows, at the celebration of a marriage that had been a lie from the beginning. She thought about Marcus's words, collateral, leverage, convenient, and felt her hands curl into fists. She thought about her studio apartment with its broken heater and thin walls. She thought about the diner, about the exhaustion, about the endless cycle of barely surviving. And she thought about the fact that for the first time in her entire invisible life, someone was offering her a choice. If I go with you, she said slowly, meeting Dante Salvatore's steady gaze, what happens then? Then I explain exactly what Marcus got you involved in, and we determine the best way to protect you from the consequences of his desperation. And after that, Ms. Bennett, you decide what you want to do with the rest of your life, but at least you'll be alive to make that decision. Headlights cut through the darkness as a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, silent and expensive. Dante extended his hand, an old-fashioned gesture that seemed strange from someone who admitted to criminal operations. What's it going to be? Arya stared at that offered hand for a long moment. Every rational instinct screamed at her to run, to call someone, to handle this like a normal person would. But normal people didn't get married as collateral. Normal people didn't overhear their husbands laughing about how desperate and convenient they were. Normal people had never been an option for Arya Bennett. She took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, certain. I want answers, she said firmly. All of them. You'll get them? Dante guided her toward the waiting car, where a driver in a crisp suit held the rear door open. Though I should warn you, sometimes the truth is harder to accept than the lies. Try me, Arya said, and slid into the Mercedes. The community hall disappeared behind them as they drove through the city streets, leaving behind the worst wedding reception in history and carrying Arya toward a truth she couldn't begin to imagine. The hotel was nothing like Arya had ever seen before. They'd driven for 20 minutes through progressively nicer neighborhoods, until the crumbling apartments and harsh streetlights gave way to tree-lined boulevards and buildings that looked like they belonged in movies. The Mercedes had pulled up to a gleaming tower of glass and steel, where doormen in uniforms opened doors and spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Now Arya stood in a penthouse suite that probably cost more per night than she made in a month, still wearing her second-hand wedding dress, trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. Dante had disappeared into another room to make phone calls, leaving her alone with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of the city spread out below like scattered diamonds. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and tried to remember how to breathe. Ms. Bennett? She turned to find Dante standing in the doorway, having traded his suit jacket for just the crisp white shirt and dark slacks. He looked less intimidating this way, though no less dangerous. It's Arya, she said. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, you might as well use my first name. Arya, then. He moved to the suite's bar area and poured 2 glasses of what looked like very expensive whiskey. You said you wanted answers. Are you sure you're ready for them? She accepted the glass he offered, though she didn't drink. Tell me about the debt. Tell me exactly what Marcus got me into. Dante settled into one of the leather armchairs, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. 6 months ago, Marcus Chen approached one of my business associates with a proposal. He needed capital to invest in what he claimed was a lucrative real estate opportunity. The amount he requested was significant, $2 million. Arya's hand tightened on her glass. $2 million. The number was incomprehensible. My associate declined, Dante continued, but Marcus was persistent. He went to other lenders, less reputable ones. Eventually, he found someone willing to extend him credit, the Rossi family. I don't know who that is. They're my primary competition in this city, Dante said. And they're considerably less concerned with ethical business practices than I am. When Marcus's investment failed, spectacularly, I might add, he found himself owing the Rossis $2 million he didn't have, plus interest that compounded daily. So he needed to pay them back, Arya said, piecing it together. But how does marrying me help with that? Because the Rossis don't just want money, Arya. They want leverage over their enemies and insurance against their allies. When Marcus realized he couldn't pay, he offered them something else. A connection to me through you. She shook her head, confused. But I don't have any connection to you. I didn't even know you existed until an hour ago. Not yet, you didn't. Dante's expression darkened. But Marcus was betting that once you were his wife, I would feel obligated to intervene. He was planning to tell the Rossis that you were important to me, that harming you would bring my organization's full wrath down on theirs. In exchange for this valuable intelligence, the Rossis would forgive his debt. The whiskey in Arya's glass trembled. That's insane. Why would they believe him? Because he had documentation showing you and I had met several times before your wedding. Receipts from the restaurants he took you to, restaurants I own. Security footage from the hotel where he proposed, a hotel that's part of my portfolio. On paper, it would look like you and I had a relationship that he was aware of when he married you. But we never met until tonight. I know that, you know that, but the Rossis wouldn't. All they would see is a pattern that suggested I had prior interest in you and that Marcus had acquired you, through marriage, as a potential weapon against me. Arya set her glass down before she dropped it. This isn't real. This can't be real. I'm afraid it is. Dante's voice gentled slightly. Marcus Chen set you up, Arya. He courted you, married you, and planned to hand you over to my enemies as proof that he had access to someone I cared about. It's actually quite clever, if morally bankrupt. But you don't care about me, Arya said, hearing the hollowness in her own voice. You don't even know me. No, I don't, which is why Marcus's plan was doomed from the start. Dante leaned forward slightly. I have people who monitor threats against my organization. When Marcus started putting together his documentation, it triggered alerts. I've been watching him for the past 2 weeks, trying to determine his endgame. I came to your wedding tonight to confront him, not to rescue you. The fact that you overheard his phone call simply moved up my timeline. So what happens now? Arya heard herself ask. You've warned him off. Can't I just go home and file for an annulment tomorrow? You could try, Dante said carefully, but there's a complication. Of course there is. The Rossis don't know yet that Marcus's plan has failed. As far as they're concerned, you're still a valuable asset, someone with a connection to me that they can exploit. Even if you annul your marriage tomorrow, they'll wonder why. They'll investigate. And if they discover that Marcus lied about your value to me, they'll want compensation. From me? Arya's voice rose. I didn't do anything. You exist, Arya. In their world, that's enough. Dante's expression was grim. The Rossi family doesn't forgive debts, and they don't forget slights. If they think Marcus used you to deceive them, they'll view you as either complicit or leverage to get to Marcus. Either way, you're in danger. She stood abruptly, unable to sit still anymore. Her wedding dress rustled as she paced to the windows and back. This is insane. I can't just hide forever because my piece of shit husband decided to use me in some mob scheme. No, you can't, Dante agreed. Which is why I'm going to fix this. How? By making it clear to the Rossis that you're under my protection, that harming you or using you would have consequences they're not prepared to face. He stood as well, moving to stand a few feet from her. It won't be comfortable, Arya, and it won't be quick, but it's the only way to ensure your safety. And what do you get out of this? She demanded. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you risk angering your rivals to protect a stranger? For the first time that evening, Dante's carefully controlled expression cracked slightly. Something that might have been old pain flickered across his features before he locked it down again. Because I know what it's like to be used as a pawn in someone else's game, he said quietly, and because I have the power to prevent that from happening to you. It would be unconscionable not to use it. Arya studied his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the hidden price. But all she saw was a dangerous man making an impossible offer for reasons she couldn't quite understand. "How long?" she asked finally. "How long would I need your protection?" "Until the situation with the Rossis is resolved and Marcus is no longer a threat. Weeks, possibly months. And I'm just supposed to trust you? Live here, in this hotel, while you handle everything?" "Not here," Dante corrected. "My home. It's more secure, and it will send the right message to anyone watching." "Your home?" Arya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This keeps getting better. So I go from my terrible studio apartment to marrying a con artist to living with a mob boss. That's quite the trajectory." "I prefer the term businessman," Dante said dryly. "I'm sure you do." They stared at each other across the expensive hotel suite, and Arya felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. She could refuse his protection, go back to her apartment, file for an annulment, and hope that the Rossi family never noticed her. She could run, leave the city entirely, start over somewhere new with nothing but the clothes on her back. Or she could trust the dangerous stranger who'd stepped out of the shadows to offer her the one thing no one else ever had: protection. "If I agree to this," she said slowly, "I want rules, boundaries. I'm not your prisoner, and I'm not your property." "Agreed. And when this is over, when I'm safe, I walk away. No strings, no obligations." "Agreed," Dante said again. "And you tell me the truth about everything. No more surprises, no more manipulation. If I'm going to trust you with my life, you owe me honesty." Something that might have been respect crossed Dante's face. "That's fair. Do we have an agreement?" Arya looked down at her left hand, at the pale line where Marcus's ring had sat for all of 4 hours. She thought about the woman she'd been this morning, desperate, hopeful, willing to marry a stranger for the promise of stability. She thought about the woman she was now, betrayed, furious, standing in a penthouse suite, negotiating with a man who could probably have her killed with a phone call. And she thought about the woman she might become, someone who survived, who adapted, who refused to be anyone's pawn ever again. "We have an agreement," she said, and held out her hand. Dante took it, his grip warm and certain. "Then welcome to your new life, Arya Bennett. I apologize in advance for how complicated it's about to become." He had no idea how right he was. The car that arrived the next morning was different from the Mercedes. A sleek black SUV with windows tinted so dark they looked like obsidian. Arya had spent the night in the hotel suite, barely sleeping, her mind circling endlessly around everything Dante had told her. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Marcus's face when he'd admitted the truth, heard his casual dismissal of everything she'd thought they had. She'd showered at dawn using products that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget, and dressed in clothes that had been delivered to her room while she slept, jeans that actually fit, a soft cashmere sweater in deep blue, leather boots that felt like butter against her skin. A note had accompanied them in neat handwriting. "Your belongings from your apartment will be collected today. These should suffice until then. DS." The efficiency of it should have bothered her. Instead, she felt oddly grateful not to be wearing her wedding dress anymore. Dante was waiting in the lobby when she emerged from the elevator, dressed in another impeccable suit, this one charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe. He looked like he'd slept perfectly, like the concept of uncertainty was foreign to him. "Ready?" he asked simply. "Does it matter if I'm not?" His lips quirked slightly. "Fair point. The car's outside." The driver was a broad-shouldered man with a face like carved granite and eyes that missed nothing. He nodded respectfully at Dante and completely ignored Arya, which she found strangely comforting. At least someone wasn't treating her like a problem to be solved. "This is Marco," Dante said as they settled into the back seat. "He's head of my personal security. Anything you need, any concerns you have, he can help." Marco caught her eyes in the rearview mirror and nodded once. Arya nodded back, unsure of the protocol. They drove north, away from the glittering downtown and into neighborhoods where the houses sat behind gates and walls, where trees older than the city itself created canopies over pristine streets. The wealth here wasn't flashy. It was inherited, established, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. Dante's home sat at the end of a private drive, hidden behind stone walls and wrought iron gates that opened silently as they approached. The house itself was a study in contradictions. Classical architecture with clean modern lines, traditional stone facade with enormous windows that let in floods of light. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost dangerous, like something out of a dream that might vanish if you looked at it too directly. "It's a bit much," Dante said quietly, watching her reaction. "I bought it 3 years ago from a banker who fled the country after a securities fraud scandal. I probably should have torn it down and started over, but I like the bones." "It's beautiful," Arya said honestly. "It's home." He opened his door as Marco brought the SUV to a stop. "Come on, I'll show you around." The interior was as impressive as the exterior. Hardwood floors that gleamed like honey, artwork that Arya suspected was original, furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. But what struck her most was the quiet. After years in her studio apartment with paper-thin walls and constant noise, the silence here felt almost sacred. "Your room is upstairs," Dante said, leading her up a curved staircase with an iron railing. "You'll have your own bathroom, obviously. There's an office next door if you need space to work or think. The library is on the first floor, and you're welcome to use it any time." He pushed open a door, and Arya stepped into a bedroom that was larger than her entire previous apartment. The bed was massive, dressed in white linens that looked impossibly soft. Windows overlooked gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. A door stood ajar, revealing a bathroom with a soaking tub and a shower with enough jets to qualify as a car wash. "This is too much," she said automatically. "It's a guest room," Dante replied. "I have 4 others just like it. You're not putting anyone out." Arya set her small borrowed purse on the dresser and turned to face him. In the morning light streaming through the windows, she could see details she'd missed last night. The faint scar along his jawline, the shadows under his eyes that suggested he slept as poorly as she did, the way his shoulders carried tension despite his casual posture. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Last night you said you knew what it was like to be used as a pawn." "What did you mean?" Dante's expression closed off immediately, a shudder falling behind his eyes. "That's a conversation for another time. You said you'd be honest with me." "I said I'd tell you the truth about the situation you're in," he corrected gently. "My past isn't relevant to keeping you safe." "Isn't it?" Arya crossed her arms. "You're asking me to trust you, to live in your house, to put my life in your hands. I think I have a right to know who you are beyond the tailored suits and the criminal empire." For a long moment, Dante just looked at her. Then to her surprise, he nodded slowly. "All right, but not here, and not now. I have some business to handle this morning, the kind that requires my direct attention. This afternoon I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Deal?" "Deal." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There's a woman named Sophia who manages the household. She'll bring you lunch around noon. If you need anything before then, there's an intercom system. Just press the button marked Main and someone will respond." "Dante?" He turned back. "Thank you," Arya said, "for all of this. I know I don't really understand what I've gotten into, but thank you for not leaving me to figure it out alone." Something in his expression softened. "You're welcome, Arya. Try to rest. Last night was traumatic, and you're safe here. Let yourself process that." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Arya alone in a bedroom that felt like a movie set. She crossed to the window and looked out at the gardens below. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably panicking, trying to figure out how to salvage his plan or escape the consequences. Somewhere out there, the Rossi family was planning their next move, completely unaware that their leverage had disappeared. And here she was, in a mansion that belonged to a man who terrified her almost as much as he intrigued her, trying to figure out how her life had gone from invisible to impossibly complicated in less than 24 hours. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the cheap prepaid one she'd been using because she couldn't afford a real plan. She pulled it out and saw 17 missed calls from Marcus, along with a string of increasingly desperate text messages. "We need to talk." "Arya, please. I can explain." "You don't understand what you've done. Call me back." "This is serious. The people I owe don't forgive mistakes." "Call me now." She stared at the messages for a long moment, then blocked his number and turned off the phone entirely. Whatever Marcus needed to say, she didn't need to hear it. The afternoon found Arya in the library, surrounded by books she'd never had time to read, and trying not to feel like an imposter in someone else's life. Sophia had brought lunch as promised, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner who'd set down a tray of food that looked like it belonged in a restaurant, asked if Arya needed anything else, and disappeared before Arya could think of what to say. She was examining a first edition of something she probably shouldn't be touching when Dante appeared in the doorway, having traded his suit for dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. "Finding everything all right?" he asked. "Your book collection is intimidating," Arya said, carefully replacing the volume. "Half of these are probably worth more than I made last year. They're meant to be read, not preserved." Dante moved into the room, his presence somehow making the large space feel smaller. "I have coffee or tea if you prefer, and I owe you some answers." They settled into leather chairs near the fireplace, where flames crackled and sent dancing shadows across the walls. Dante poured coffee from a silver service that looked antique, handed her a cup, then sat back and seemed to gather his thoughts. "You asked about my past," he said finally. "About what I meant when I said I understood being used as a pawn." Arya nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "My father built this organization from nothing," Dante began. He came to this city with a few $100s and a willingness to do what others wouldn't. By the time I was born, he controlled significant portions of the shipping, construction, and hospitality industries. Legitimate businesses mixed with less legitimate ones, all generating enough money to build an empire. He paused, staring into his coffee like it held answers. "I was 17 when my mother died. Cancer, aggressive, and fast. My father never recovered from losing her. He became paranoid, suspicious, convinced that his rivals had somehow caused her illness. He started making erratic decisions, taking unnecessary risks. His second in command, a man named Victor Castellano, saw an opportunity. To take over? Arya guessed. To use me as leverage, Dante corrected. Victor convinced my father that the only way to ensure the family's future was to arrange a marriage between me and his daughter, Elena. It would unite our resources, eliminate any possibility of internal conflict, and guarantee succession. My father, grieving and desperate, agreed. Arya's stomach tightened. How old were you? 19 when they announced the engagement, 20 when Elena died 3 days before our wedding. The words fell like stones into still water. What happened? Arya asked softly. Car accident, brake failure on a mountain road. Dante's voice remained steady, but his knuckles were white around his cup. The investigation ruled it accidental, but I knew better. Victor had been embezzling from the family for years. Elena discovered the evidence and threatened to expose him. He killed his own daughter to protect his secrets and his position. My God. I couldn't prove it, Dante continued, not in any way that would hold up legally or satisfy the old codes my father still followed, but I knew. And Victor knew I knew. It became a waiting game. Which of us would make a move first? What did you do? I got better at the game than he was. Dante met her eyes directly. I spent 5 years building my own network, my own alliances, my own evidence. When I finally moved against him, it was so comprehensive that even my father couldn't deny what Victor had done. He was exiled from the organization and the city. Last I heard, he was living in Argentina under an assumed name, looking over his shoulder every day. And your father? Died 2 years ago. Heart attack, actually natural this time. A muscle worked in Dante's jaw. He left everything to me. The businesses, the responsibilities, the debts and alliances and blood feuds. I inherited an empire built on violence and kept running through carefully managed brutality. Arya set down her coffee, her hands suddenly unsteady. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know who's protecting you, Dante said simply. I'm not a good man, Arya. I've made choices that keep me awake at night. I've hurt people who probably deserved it, and some who definitely didn't. I run an organization that exists in the gray areas between legal and criminal, and I'm comfortable there in ways that should probably concern you. But I also know what it's like to be traded like property in someone else's negotiation. I know what it's like to have your future decided by people who view you as a means to an end rather than a person. His gray eyes were steady on hers. Elena didn't deserve what happened to her. You don't deserve what Marcus tried to do. And I have the power to ensure that, at least in your case, the story has a different ending." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Arya studied the man across from her, this dangerous, complicated, unexpectedly honest man who'd stepped into her disaster of a life and offered salvation with strings he was at least willing to name. "I don't know what to say," she admitted finally. "You don't have to say anything." Dante stood, moving to the fireplace to stare into the flames. "I just wanted you to understand that when I promised to protect you, I understand the weight of that promise. I understand what's at stake. Can I ask one more question?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret it, taking over your father's empire instead of walking away?" Dante was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," he said finally. "But regret and responsibility aren't mutually exclusive. I can wish I'd had different choices while still honoring the ones I made." Before Arya could respond, the door opened and Marco appeared, his expression grim. "Boss, we have a problem." Dante turned immediately, his entire demeanor shifting from contemplative to commanding. "What kind of problem?" "Marcus Chen is dead." The words seemed to suck all the air from the room. Arya felt her coffee cup slip from her fingers, heard it shatter against the floor, watched coffee spread across the antique rug like blood. "What?" Dante's voice was sharp, dangerous. "When?" "His body was found an hour ago in his apartment. Single gunshot to the head, execution style. Police are calling it a homicide." Marco's eyes flicked to Arya, then back to Dante. "The Rossis are claiming they had nothing to do with it." "Of course they are." Dante's mind was clearly racing, calculating angles and implications. "Who else knew about Marcus's debt?" "Just us and the Rossis, as far as we know." "Then someone's lying, or there's a third party involved." Dante pulled out his phone, already dialing. "Get everyone together. I want a full report in 30 minutes. Marco nodded and disappeared. Arya stood frozen, her mind unable to process what she'd just heard. Marcus was dead. The man she'd married yesterday, the man who'd betrayed her so casually, was dead. "Arya," Dante's voice cut through her shock. "Look at me." She did, and found his expression gentler than she'd expected. "I need you to listen very carefully," he said. "Marcus's death changes everything. If the Rossis killed him, it means they're tying up loose ends, and you're a loose end. If someone else killed him, it means there are players in this game we don't know about yet. Either way, you're in more danger now than you were yesterday." "I don't understand." Her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "Why would anyone kill him? Because he knew too much, or because he was a liability, or because someone wanted to send a message?" Dante moved closer, his hands settling on her shoulders. Steady, grounding. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you probably feel guilty, or scared, or both. But right now, I need you to trust me and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" Arya nodded mutely. "Good." His hands squeezed gently, then released. "Marco is going to take you upstairs. You're going to stay in your room with the door locked until I come get you. Do not answer the door for anyone except me or Marco. Do not use your phone. Do not go near any windows. Understand? You think someone's coming for me?" "I think we don't know enough yet to rule anything out," Dante said. "And I didn't promise to protect you just to lose you because we got careless." Marco reappeared in the doorway. Dante nodded to him, and the big man moved to Arya's side. "I'll be up as soon as I have answers," Dante promised. "A few hours at most." Arya let Marco guide her from the library, her mind still spinning. As they climbed the stairs, she heard Dante's voice behind them, sharp and commanding as he coordinated his people. This was a different man from the one who'd shared his past with her over coffee. This was the mob boss, the criminal, the man who'd built an empire on violence and strategy. And for better or worse, he was the only thing standing between her and whatever had killed Marcus Chen. Her room felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a very comfortable cage. Marco checked the windows, tested the locks, then positioned himself outside her door with the kind of stillness that suggested he could stand there for hours without moving. Arya sank onto the bed and stared at her shaking hands. Somewhere in the city, police were photographing Marcus's body, collecting evidence, trying to piece together what had happened. Somewhere, His ex-girlfriend Rachel was probably getting the news. Somewhere, Marcus's parents were about to learn their son was dead. And here she was, the bride who'd lasted 4 hours, now a widow after less than 24. Her phone was still off, but she pulled it out anyway, stared at the black screen, thought about all those desperate messages Marcus had sent. Had he known he was in danger? Had he tried to call her because he was scared or because he thought she could somehow help him? It didn't matter now. Nothing Marcus had wanted or feared or planned mattered anymore. She should feel something, she thought, grief or relief or vindication. But all she felt was numb, like she'd used up all her emotions in the past day and had nothing left to spend. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She tensed, but then Marco's voice came through the door. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Salvatore is on his way up. I'm going to step away to check the perimeter. Door stays locked until he arrives." "Understood," Arya called back. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway, then silence. The house seemed to hold its breath around her. When the knock came again a few minutes later, she moved to the door cautiously. "Dante? It's me." She unlocked the door and pulled it open. Dante stood in the hallway, looking tired and grim. He stepped inside and she locked the door behind him automatically. "Tell me," she said. "Marcus was killed sometime early this morning, probably around 3 or 4 a.m. His apartment showed signs of a struggle, but minimal. Whoever did this was professional. The gun was left at the scene, unregistered and untraceable. No witnesses, no security footage from the hallway cameras because they'd been disabled. The Rossis? They're denying it, and honestly, I believe them." Dante moved to the window, checked the locks himself despite Marco's earlier inspection. This was too clean, too professional for a message killing. If the Rossis wanted to punish Marcus for his deception, they would have made it public, made it painful. This was an execution designed to eliminate a problem quietly. Then who? That's what concerns me. Dante turned to face her. "I've made some calls, reached out to every source I have. No one's claiming credit, and no one knows anything. That suggests either perfect operational security or someone completely outside our usual networks." Arya wrapped her arms around herself. "What does that mean for me?" "It means we proceed with extreme caution until we understand the full picture." Dante's expression was serious, but not unkind. "I'm moving additional security to the house. No one gets in or out without my direct approval. You don't leave the property for any reason. I know that sounds extreme, but..." "No," Arya interrupted. "I get it. Someone killed my husband less than 24 hours after our wedding. Extreme sounds appropriate." "Your husband?" Dante's voice was careful. "How are you processing that?" "I don't know." Arya sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "I should feel something, right? Even if he betrayed me, even if he tried to use me, I married him. And now he's dead. I should feel, I don't know, sad? Guilty? Something." "You feel whatever you feel," Dante said simply. "There's no right way to respond to this." "I just feel numb." She looked up at him. "Is that horrible?" "It's human." He moved to sit in the chair near the window, maintaining a respectful distance. "You've been through multiple traumas in rapid succession. Your mind is protecting you the only way it knows how." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down on both of them. "Can I ask you something?" Arya said finally. "Anything." "When Elena died, when you knew Victor had killed her, did you feel guilty for not protecting her?" Dante's expression tightened. "Every day since. Even though you didn't know what he was planning, even though you couldn't have stopped it. Knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are very different things." He met her eyes. "I know rationally that I did everything I could with the information I had, but I also know that if I'd been smarter, faster, more paranoid, she might still be alive. That's a heavy weight to carry." "Yes." His voice was quiet. "Which is why I won't make the same mistakes with you." The promise hung in the air between them, weighted with everything they'd both lost and everything they both feared losing. "I believe you," Arya said softly, "and that terrifies me almost as much as everything else." "Why?" "Because believing you means trusting you, and trusting you means admitting I can't handle this alone. And I've been alone for so long that I don't know how to be anything else." Dante stood and crossed to where she sat, then did something that surprised her. He knelt so they were at eye level, his expression open and serious. "You're not alone anymore, Arya. I know that doesn't erase the past, and I know my protection comes with its own complications. But for as long as you need it, you have a place here, you have safety here, and you have someone who understands what it's like to be used and is willing to burn down anyone who tries to use you again." Arya felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door she'd kept locked for years was finally being tested. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Dante nodded and stood, offering her his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. "Try to get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll start figuring out our next moves. But tonight, just let yourself process everything." "Will you tell me?" she asked as he moved toward the door. "When you find out who killed Marcus?" "Yes." "Even if the answer is bad?" "Especially if the answer is bad," Dante said. "I promised you honesty. That doesn't change just because the truth is ugly." After he left, Arya changed into the pajamas that had appeared in her dresser. Silk, expensive, completely foreign to someone who usually slept in old t-shirts. She climbed into the massive bed and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from the security lights outside play across the plaster. Marcus was dead. Her husband of 4 hours was dead, killed by someone professional enough to leave no traces and cold enough to execute him in his own apartment. And she was here, in a mansion owned by a man who admitted to running a criminal empire, surrounded by guards and security systems, protected by someone who'd promised to burn down anyone who tried to hurt her. Her old life, the diner, the studio apartment, the invisibility, felt like it belonged to someone else. That Arya Bennett had died in the parking lot of the Riverside Community Hall, the moment she'd heard Marcus laughing about how convenient and desperate she was. This Arya Bennett, the one lying in silk pajamas in a room worth more than everything she'd ever owned, was someone new, someone harder, someone who'd looked a dangerous man in the eyes and made demands instead of accepting whatever crumbs were offered. She didn't know if she liked this new version of herself yet, but she knew she was a survivor. She knew she was done being anyone's pawn, and she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The thought was terrifying and comforting in equal measure, and it followed her down into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of wedding dresses and gunshots, and gray eyes that promised both danger and protection in the same breath. 3 weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. Arya woke each morning in the guest room that had become hers, ate breakfast in a kitchen larger than her old apartment, and spent her days learning to navigate a world she'd never imagined existing. The mansion became familiar. The library where morning light streamed through tall windows, the gardens where she walked when the walls felt too close, the study where Dante worked behind closed doors on business she didn't ask about. Marcus's funeral had come and gone without her attendance. Dante had advised against it, and she'd agreed easily enough. What would she have said to his parents, who probably didn't even know about their hasty wedding? What condolences could she offer when she felt nothing but the echo of betrayal? The police had questioned her once, 2 detectives who'd arrived with sympathetic expressions and sharp eyes. Dante had sat beside her in the formal living room while she'd explained the timeline, the wedding, the overheard conversation, the annulment she'd been planning. They'd seemed satisfied that she had no involvement in Marcus's death, though one detective had looked at Dante with barely concealed suspicion before they'd left. Now it was a Tuesday morning in late October, and Arya stood in the kitchen watching Sophia prepare lunch with the kind of effortless competence that came from decades of practice. The older woman had warmed to her over the weeks, their initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. "You should eat more," Sophia said without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "You're too thin." "I eat plenty," Arya protested, though it was true she'd lost her appetite somewhere between the wedding and the funeral she hadn't attended. "You pick at your food like a bird," Sophia pointed her knife for emphasis. "Mr. Salvatore mentioned you worked as a waitress before. Long hours, yes? You probably never ate properly then either." "There wasn't always time," Arya admitted. "Well, there's time now." Sophia's expression softened. "And you're safe here. You know that, right, Mr. Salvatore? He takes his promises seriously, especially to people who need protecting." Before Arya could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Dante entered, phone pressed to his ear and tension written across his shoulders. He nodded to them both, but kept talking. I don't care what Vincent Rossi thinks he knows, Dante said sharply. The facts are clear. We had nothing to do with Chen's death, and neither did his organization. If he wants to pursue this vendetta, he'll find out exactly how expensive that mistake will be. A pause. No, I'll handle it personally. Set up a meeting for tomorrow night. Neutral ground, just Vincent and me. He ended the call and stood for a moment, staring at his phone like it held answers he didn't want to see. Problems? Arya asked quietly. Dante looked up, and some of the hardness in his expression eased. Nothing I can't handle. Vincent Rossi has decided that Marcus's death is somehow connected to a larger conspiracy. He's making noise about retaliation. But you didn't kill Marcus. No, I didn't. But Vincent's not interested in facts when paranoia serves his purposes better. Dante pocketed his phone and moved to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup with practiced efficiency. How are you doing today? It was a question he asked often, always genuine, never perfunctory. Arya had learned to answer honestly. Restless, she said. I appreciate everything you've done, but I feel like I'm living in a very comfortable cage. I know. Dante leaned against the counter, studying her over the rim of his cup. I've been thinking about that. What if I told you there was a way for you to feel useful while staying safe? I'd say I'm listening. I have several legitimate businesses that could use someone with fresh eyes and a different perspective. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would put you at risk, but it would give you something to do besides wait for this situation to resolve itself. Arya felt something lift in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the promise of purpose. What kind of businesses? Restaurants mostly, hotels, a few retail properties. Dante's lips quirked slightly. Contrary to popular belief, I don't spend all day orchestrating criminal activities. The legal enterprises actually require significantly more management. And you'd trust me with that? I'd trust you to be observant and honest, which is more than I can say for some of the people currently on my payroll. He set down his coffee. Think about it. You don't have to decide right now. But Arya was already nodding. Yes, I want to help. Just like that? Just like that. She met his eyes directly. You've given me safety and shelter. Let me earn it. Something in Dante's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or respect. You don't need to earn anything, Arya. Protection isn't a transaction. Maybe not for you, she said, but I've spent my whole life feeling like I owed someone something. My father, for putting a roof over my head even if he barely acknowledged I existed. The diner owner, for giving me shifts when he could have hired someone more experienced. Marcus, for offering me a way out even if it was all a lie. She took a breath. I'd rather work for what I have than feel indebted for charity. Dante was quiet for a long moment, something like understanding crossing his features. All right, we'll start with the restaurant division. I'll have my operations manager meet with you tomorrow to go over the current portfolio and areas that need attention. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might change your mind when you see the state of some of these places. But he was smiling slightly, and Arya found herself smiling back. Sophia cleared her throat pointedly. If you two are finished negotiating, lunch will be ready in 20 minutes. And Mr. Salvatore, you have that meeting at 2. I remember. Dante pushed off from the counter. Arya, we should talk about tomorrow night's meeting with Vincent Rossi. It might affect security protocols here. They moved to Dante's study, a room Arya had only glimpsed before. It was masculine and efficient, dark wood furniture, leather chairs, walls lined with filing cabinets, and a few carefully chosen pieces of art. The desk was massive, its surface organized with the precision of someone who needed control over their environment. Dante gestured to one of the chairs and took his seat behind the desk. The change in setting altered the dynamic between them. Here, he was clearly the man in charge, the one who made decisions that affected hundreds of people. Vincent Rossi is the eldest son of Antonio Rossi, who runs the family organization, Dante explained. Vincent is ambitious, paranoid, and convinced that everyone is plotting against him. He's been looking for an excuse to move against my operations for years. And Marcus's death gave him that excuse? Potentially. Vincent believes that someone is trying to start a war between our organizations by eliminating mutual contacts and creating false evidence. He's not entirely wrong. Someone did kill Marcus, and the timing suggests it was meant to create exactly this kind of tension. Arya processed this. So who benefits from you and the Rossis going to war? That's the question I've been asking. Dante pulled a file from his desk drawer and opened it. There are 3 other major organizations in this city, plus various smaller crews and independent operators. Any of them could benefit from us weakening each other. Or it could be someone inside one of your organizations, Arya said slowly. Someone who wants to change the power structure. Dante looked at her sharply. What makes you say that? My father used to say that the most dangerous enemy is the one who sits at your table. She shrugged. He was drunk most of the time, but occasionally he made sense. He wasn't wrong. Dante closed the file. I've been investigating that angle, but so far nothing concrete. Everyone in my inner circle has been with me for years. I trust them. Did you trust Victor Castellano? The question came out before Arya could stop it. Silence fell heavy between them. Dante's expression went very still. I'm sorry, Arya said quickly. That was... No! Dante held up a hand. You're right to ask. Yes, I trusted Victor. My father trusted him completely, and that trust nearly destroyed everything. He stood and moved to the window, his back to her. I've been more careful since then, paranoid even. But paranoia only works if you're paranoid about the right things. Tomorrow night, when you meet with Vincent, will you be safe? I'll have Marco and my best security team. The meeting location will be swept beforehand. I'm as safe as I can be in this life. He turned to face her. But I appreciate the concern. Arya struggled to articulate the feeling. You've protected me. I'd like to think someone's protecting you too. Careful, Arya. That almost sounds like you're starting to care. There was no mockery in his voice, just honest curiosity. Arya found herself unable to look away from those gray eyes. Maybe I am, she admitted quietly. Is that allowed? There's no rule against it, Dante said, but it complicates things. Things are already complicated. Fair point. He moved back to his desk but didn't sit. I should probably warn you, caring about people in my world is dangerous. It gives enemies leverage. It creates vulnerabilities. I'm already a vulnerability, Arya pointed out. You made me one when you decided to protect me. That's different. You're under my protection because it's the right thing to do, not because He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Not because of personal attachment. Isn't it, though? Arya stood, suddenly needing to be on equal footing. You told me about Elena, about Victor. You shared things you didn't have to share. That's not just professional protection, Dante. That's something else. Arya, I'm not asking you to define it, she said quickly. I'm just saying that maybe we both need to acknowledge that this situation is more complicated than simple protection and gratitude. Dante studied her for a long moment, and Arya felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. There was something building between them, had been building since that first night in the parking lot, and they were both carefully not naming it. You're right, he said finally, and that terrifies me more than Vincent Rossi and all his paranoid theories combined. Before Arya could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. I have to take this. We'll continue this conversation later? Of course. She left him to his call and wandered back toward the library, her mind spinning. What was she doing? Getting emotionally involved with a man who ran a criminal empire, who'd admitted to making choices that kept him awake at night, who carried the weight of violence and power like other people carried briefcases. But he'd also been kind to her, honest with her. He'd given her safety when no one else would, and he'd never once made her feel like she owed him anything beyond basic trust. The afternoon passed in relative quiet. Arya read in the library, watched the autumn light fade across the gardens, and tried not to think about tomorrow night's meeting or the way her heart had jumped when Dante had looked at her in his study. Dinner was a quiet affair, just her and Dante at one end of the massive dining table, Sophia having left a meal that could have fed 10 people. They talked about inconsequential things, carefully avoiding the tension that had sprung up between them earlier. Tell me about the restaurant you want me to look at first, Arya said, chasing pasta around her plate. It's called Meridian, high-end Italian in the financial district. The food is excellent, but revenue has been declining for 6 months. The manager claims it's the economy, but I suspect it's something else. Like what? That's what I need you to figure out. Dante poured them both more wine. You worked in a diner for years. You understand the industry from the ground level. Go in as a customer, observe the operation, tell me what you see." "That's actually a good idea," Arya said, surprised. "I have them occasionally." His tone was dry, but his eyes were warm. They finished dinner and moved to the library, where a fire crackled in the hearth. Arya curled into one of the leather chairs while Dante stood by the fire, lost in thought. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Always?" "When this is over, when I'm safe, and the situation with the Rossis is resolved, what happens to me?" Dante turned to look at her. "What do you want to happen?" "I don't know," Arya admitted. "A month ago, I would have said I just wanted stability. A job that paid the bills, a place to live that didn't have cockroaches. Simple things." She paused. "But now I've seen another world. I've lived in it, even temporarily, and I don't know if I can go back to being invisible." "You were never invisible, Arya. You were just surrounded by people who refused to see you." The words settled into her chest, warm and aching at the same time. "When this is over," Dante said carefully, "you can stay as long as you want. Work in the restaurants, build a career, have the stability you were looking for. Or you can leave, start fresh somewhere new with resources to make it possible. Your choice." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He moved to sit in the chair opposite hers. "I told you before. This isn't a transaction. When I make promises, I keep them, including the promise that you're free to choose your own path." Arya wanted to believe him. More than that, she realized she did believe him. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, trust had taken root despite all her reasons to be cautious. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire casting dancing shadows across the walls. Arya felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before the wedding, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. "You should get some rest," Dante said eventually. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "You too, especially with the meeting tomorrow night." "I'll try." But there was something in his expression that suggested sleep wouldn't come easily. Arya stood and moved toward the door, then paused. "Dante, be careful tomorrow, please." "I will." He met her eyes. "I promise." She nodded and left him there, staring into the fire with the weight of the world on his shoulders. The next day passed in a blur of activity. Dante's operations manager, a sharp woman named Teresa who looked like she could run a Fortune 500 company, spent 2 hours going over the restaurant portfolio with Arya. There were 12 properties in total, ranging from casual cafes to upscale dining, and each had its own challenges and opportunities. "Meridian is a good place to start," Teresa said, sliding a folder across the conference table. "It's struggling but salvageable. Plus, it's public-facing enough that you won't attract unwanted attention." "When should I go?" "Tonight, actually. I've made you a reservation for 7 under a different name. Go as a regular customer, observe everything, report back to Mr. Salvatore tomorrow." Arya felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nerves. It wasn't much, but it was something. A purpose beyond simply surviving. By 6:30, she was dressed in one of the outfits that had mysteriously appeared in her closet, a simple black dress that looked expensive without being flashy, paired with heels that made her legs look longer than they actually were. Marco would drive her to the restaurant and wait outside, a compromise between freedom and security that Dante had insisted on. She found Dante in his study, already dressed for his meeting with Vincent Rossi. He wore all black, shirt, slacks, jacket, and looked dangerous in a way that made Arya's breath catch. "You look nice," he said, standing when she entered. "So do you." "Terrifying but nice." That earned her a small smile. "Terrifying is the goal. How are you feeling about tonight?" "Nervous," Arya admitted, "but good nervous. Like I'm finally doing something instead of just waiting." "You'll do great." Dante checked his watch. "Marco will have you back by 10. I should be done with Vincent around the same time." "Be safe." "You too." He hesitated, then crossed to where she stood and surprised her by pressing a kiss to her forehead, brief, chaste, but loaded with unspoken meaning. "I'll see you when we both get home." Home. The word echoed in Arya's mind as Marco drove her toward the financial district. When had this place become home? When had she started thinking of Dante as something more than her protector? Meridian was everything Teresa had promised, elegant without being pretentious, the kind of place where business deals were made over expensive wine and handmade pasta. Arya was seated at a small table near the window, given a menu with no prices, and left to observe. And observe she did. The service was impeccable but impersonal, the servers going through motions without genuine engagement. The food was excellent, but portions were small and presentation overwrought. The clientele was sparse for a Friday night, and those who were there seemed more interested in being seen than actually enjoying their meals. She understood the problem within 30 minutes. Meridian had forgotten that restaurants were about experience, not just food. It had become a performance without heart, and customers could feel the difference even if they couldn't articulate it. Arya was making mental notes for her report when she noticed a man watching her from across the dining room. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with sharp features and expensive clothes. Something about his attention made the hair on the back of her neck rise. She tried to ignore him, focusing on her meal, but she felt his gaze like a weight. When she glanced up again, he was standing, moving toward her table with predatory confidence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I hope I'm not being too forward, but I couldn't help noticing you're dining alone. My name is Vincent Rossi." Every muscle in Arya's body went rigid. Vincent Rossi, the man Dante was meeting with tonight, the man who thought someone was trying to start a war between the organizations. And he was standing at her table, smiling like a shark. "I'm sorry," Arya said carefully. "I'm actually waiting for someone." "Are you?" Vincent's eyes were sharp, assessing. "That's interesting because you've been here for 45 minutes and ordered an entree. That doesn't seem like someone waiting for dinner company." "A friend," Arya improvised, "meeting me for dessert." "I see." Vincent tilted his head slightly. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before?" "I don't think so." Well, perhaps I'm mistaken." But his expression suggested he wasn't mistaken at all, that he knew exactly who she was. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Smith," Arya lied. "Emily Smith." "Of course." Vincent's smile widened. "Enjoy your dinner, Miss Smith, and do give my regards to your friend when they arrive." He returned to his table, but Arya could feel him watching her for the rest of her meal. Her appetite had completely vanished, replaced by ice-cold fear. Vincent Rossi knew who she was. He'd sought her out deliberately, tested her, let her know he could reach her whenever he wanted. She signaled for the check and left cash on the table, not wanting to use a credit card that might confirm her identity. Marco was waiting outside as promised, and the relief she felt at seeing his solid presence was overwhelming. "We need to go," she said quietly as he opened the car door. "Now." "Problem?" Vincent Rossi was in the restaurant. He approached me. Marco's expression went deadly serious. He pulled out his phone and made a call while simultaneously starting the car and pulling into traffic. "Boss, we have a situation." Arya couldn't hear Dante's response, but Marco's side of the conversation was clipped and professional. He laid out the facts, Vincent's approach, the timing, the implications, while navigating through the city streets with practiced efficiency. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "Mr. Salvatore wants you back at the house immediately. He's leaving his meeting with Vincent now." "Is he angry?" "At Vincent?" "Yes." "At you?" "No." Marco glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You didn't do anything wrong, Miss Bennett, but this changes things." They made it back to the mansion in record time. Dante's SUV was already in the driveway, and he met them at the door, his expression thunderous. "Inside," he said shortly. "Now." Arya followed him to his study, where he paced like a caged predator. Marco took up position by the door, his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. "Tell me exactly what happened," Dante demanded. "Everything he said. Everything you said. Don't leave anything out." Arya recounted the conversation word for word, watching Dante's expression darken with each detail. "He knew who you were," Dante said when she finished. "It wasn't a question." "I think so. He said I look familiar. And he chose tonight, the same night he was supposed to be meeting with me, to approach you." Dante's hands curled into fists. "That wasn't coincidence. That was a message." "What kind of message?" "That he can reach you whenever he wants. That my protection only extends as far as he allows it to." Dante's voice was cold with fury. He's testing boundaries, seeing how far he can push before I react. What are you going to do? Dante stopped pacing and looked at her directly. I'm going to make it very clear that you are completely off limits, that approaching you again would be the last mistake he ever makes. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Arya felt something else, a fierce gratitude that someone finally considered her worth protecting at any cost. This is my fault, she said. I should have been more careful. This is Vincent's fault, Dante corrected sharply, and mine, for underestimating how desperate he is to gain advantage. He crossed to where she sat and knelt in front of her chair, much like he had that first night. Arya, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. All right? Are you afraid of me? Of what I'm capable of? She considered the question seriously, looking into those gray eyes that held both darkness and something that might have been hope. No, she said finally. I'm afraid of people like Vincent who use others as pawns. I'm afraid of being powerless again. But you? She reached out and touched his face gently, feeling the tension in his jaw. You terrify me for entirely different reasons. What reasons? Because I'm starting to care about you, Arya admitted. And caring about someone means they can hurt you. It means being vulnerable. And I've spent so long protecting myself that I don't know if I remember how to do anything else. Dante's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. I know the feeling. They stayed like that for a long moment, the air between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Then Dante stood, pulling her up with him. It's late. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. But as Arya moved toward the door, Dante caught her hand. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm starting to care about you too, and that scares me more than anything Vincent Rossi could ever threaten. Arya squeezed his hand once, then left him standing in his study, both of them trying to navigate feelings that had no place in the dangerous world they inhabited. She lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about gray eyes and promises of protection, and the way her heart had jumped when Dante had admitted he cared. Somewhere in this city, Vincent Rossi was probably planning his next move, and somewhere else, someone had murdered Marcus and set all of this in motion. But here, in this moment, all Arya could think about was the man downstairs who'd promised to keep her safe, and the terrifying realization that she was falling for him despite every logical reason not to. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new complications. But tonight, she let herself feel something other than fear. She let herself feel hope, fragile and fierce. That maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found someone who saw her not as invisible or convenient, but as someone worth protecting at any cost. Even if that cost was his own carefully guarded heart. The call came at 3 a.m, shattering the fragile sleep Arya had finally achieved. She heard it through the walls, Dante's phone ringing, his voice sharp and immediate, then footsteps in the hallway moving fast. She was out of bed and pulling on a robe before she'd consciously decided to move. The house was alive with controlled chaos. Lights blazed in every room. Marco stood in the main hallway coordinating with someone on his phone, while 2 other security personnel she recognized moved with purpose toward the front entrance. What's happening? Arya asked, her heart hammering. Marco turned, his expression grim. Vincent Rossi is dead, murdered in his car about an hour ago. The world tilted sideways. What? Miss Bennett, you need to go back to your room and lock the door, Marco said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Now. But Arya was already moving past him, drawn by instinct toward Dante's study, where light spilled from the open door. She found him behind his desk, phone pressed to one ear while he typed rapidly on his computer with his free hand. I don't care what the police think they know, he was saying, his voice like cut glass. I was in a meeting with my accountant until midnight. 30 witnesses can confirm my whereabouts. If they want to waste time investigating me while the real killer walks free, that's their problem. He paused, listening. Then his eyes cut to Arya standing in the doorway. Something in his expression shifted. I'll call you back. He ended the call and stood. You should be upstairs. Marco told me. Vincent is dead. Yes. They think you did it. Of course they do. Dante moved around the desk, his movements controlled but tense. Vincent and I had a very public disagreement last night. He approached you at the restaurant, which I made clear was unacceptable. Then 6 hours later, he's found shot in his car outside a club in the warehouse district. I'm the obvious suspect. But you didn't do it. No, I didn't. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion around his eyes. But whoever did is trying very hard to make it look like I did. Arya's mind raced, connecting dots she didn't want to see. Marcus dies, and it creates tension between you and the Rossis. Now Vincent dies, and that tension explodes into open warfare. Someone's orchestrating this. That's exactly what's happening. Dante's jaw tightened. And they're doing a damn good job of it. Antonio Rossi has already put out word that he's holding me responsible for his son's death. The police are scrambling to gather evidence. And somewhere out there, whoever actually pulled the trigger is watching this all unfold exactly as they planned. What are you going to do? Find them before this city tears itself apart. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. But first, I need to make sure you're safe. This situation just became exponentially more dangerous. I'm not going anywhere, Arya said firmly. Arya, no. You said yourself someone's trying to start a war. Running away won't change that. And honestly, she met his eyes directly. I think I'm safer with you than I would be anywhere else. You have remarkable faith in someone you barely know. I know enough. She reached up and covered his hand with hers, the one still cupping her face. I know you've kept every promise you've made to me. I know you've been honest even when the truth was ugly. I know that whoever killed Marcus and Vincent isn't going to stop just because I'm inconvenient. So stop trying to protect me from this and let me help you figure it out. Dante stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder crossing his features. Then he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like both shelter and surrender. You're going to be the death of me, he murmured against her hair. Not if whoever's doing this gets to you first, Arya said, and felt him laugh despite everything. They stood like that for a moment longer, drawing strength from each other. Then Dante released her and stepped back, his expression shifting back to business. If you're staying, then you need to know everything, he said. Come on. He led her to the conference room adjacent to his study, where the walls were covered in photographs, documents, and what looked like a massive conspiracy board. Marco joined them, along with Teresa and a man Arya didn't recognize, late 50s, silver hair, expensive suit. Arya, this is Michael Chen, my head of security operations and no relation to Marcus, Dante said. Michael, Arya Bennett. She's staying for this briefing. Michael nodded respectfully. Miss Bennett. Dante moved to the board and began pointing to various elements. Marcus Chen dies 4 weeks ago. Single gunshot, professional execution, no witnesses. The Rossis deny involvement, and I believe them because it wasn't their style. Then tonight, Vincent Rossi dies the same way. Single shot, professional, no witnesses. But this time there's evidence pointing to me. What kind of evidence? Arya asked. Security footage from near the scene showing one of my vehicles, Michael said. Except I can verify that particular car was in our garage all night, which means someone either faked the footage or cloned the vehicle. And a witness who claims to have overheard me threatening Vincent yesterday, Dante added. Except the conversation they're describing never happened, at least not with those words. Teresa pulled up something on her tablet. I've been going through our personnel records, looking for anyone with the skills and access to orchestrate something this complex. It's a short list. How short? Arya moved closer to look at the tablet screen. 12 people total across both organizations who have the technical expertise, the connections, and the motive. Teresa highlighted several names, but only 3 who could move freely between our operations and the Rossis without raising suspicion. Dante's expression was stone. Show me. Teresa pulled up 3 files. The first was a man in his 40s named Robert Drake, who apparently handled logistics for several of Dante's shipping operations. The second was a woman named Lucia Martinez, who worked in financial operations for the Rossi family. The third made Arya's breath catch. Victor Castellano, she said, reading the name. I thought he was exiled. He was, Dante said quietly, but exile doesn't mean dead. And Victor has every reason to want me destroyed. He's been in Argentina for 5 years, Michael protested. We've had eyes on him the whole time. Have we? Dante turned to face his security chief. Or have we been watching someone we think is Victor while the real man slipped back into the city? Silence fell heavy in the room. I'll check with our contacts in Buenos Aires, Michael said finally. But if Victor's here, if he's been here, someone in our organization has been helping him. You don't stay hidden in your enemy's city for weeks or months without inside support. Make it your priority, Dante ordered, and increase security on all our key assets. If Victor's making a move, he won't stop with Vincent. The meeting continued for another hour, each of them dissecting the evidence and building theories. Arya watched Dante work, saw the strategic mind that had built and maintained his empire. He was methodical, thorough, missing nothing. But she could also see the weight pressing down on his shoulders, the responsibility for everyone in this room and everyone who depended on his organization for their livelihood. When Michael and Teresa finally left to execute their assignments, Dante slumped back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. Coffee? Arya offered. Something stronger. She found the whiskey he kept in the sideboard and poured them both glasses. Dawn was breaking outside the windows, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. They'd been up all night, and the day ahead promised no rest. Do you really think it's Victor? Arya asked, settling into the chair beside him. I think Victor has the motive and the skills, Dante said. But something doesn't fit. Victor was always more direct. He preferred manipulation and intimidation, not elaborate frame jobs. People change, especially people who've spent 5 years in exile plotting revenge. Maybe. Dante sipped his whiskey, staring at the conspiracy board. Or maybe someone else is using Victor as a convenient scapegoat, the same way they're using me. Arya followed his gaze to the board, to the web of connections and theories. Something nagged at the back of her mind, a pattern she couldn't quite see. What if it's not about you at all? She said slowly. What do you mean? What if you and the Rossis going to war is just a side effect? What if the real target is something else entirely? She stood and moved to the board, tracing connections with her finger. Marcus dies, which brings me under your protection. Vincent dies, which makes Antonio Rossi want revenge against you. But what if someone wanted those specific outcomes for a different reason? Dante was watching her intently now. Keep going. I don't know enough about your world to see it yet, Arya admitted. But in the diner, when someone made a big show of arguing, it was usually to distract from something else. The fight wasn't the point. It was the cover. A distraction. Dante stood abruptly and moved to the board. While everyone's focused on the potential war, what are we not paying attention to? He pulled out his phone and called Michael back. I need you to run a full audit of all our operations. Not just security, finances, logistics, personnel, everything. Look for anything unusual in the past 2 months, no matter how small. Whatever Michael said in response made Dante's expression sharpen. Do it now. I want preliminary results by noon. He ended the call and turned to Arya. You might have just given us our first real lead. I might have just made an obvious observation, Arya countered. In my experience, the obvious observations are the ones everyone misses because they're too busy looking for complicated answers. He checked his watch. It's 6 a.m. You should try to get some sleep. So should you. I will, eventually. But they both knew he was lying. Arya crossed to where he stood and took his hand. Come upstairs, just for a few hours. Whatever's happening, you'll handle it better if you're not running on adrenaline and whiskey. Arya. Please, Dante. For me. Something in her voice must have reached him, because he nodded. They left the conspiracy board and the unanswered questions behind, climbing the stairs in the growing daylight. When they reached Arya's room, Dante paused in the doorway. I should let you rest, he said. But Arya didn't release his hand. Stay. Just for a while. I don't want to be alone, and I don't think you should be either. He searched her face, looking for doubt or uncertainty. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he followed her inside and closed the door quietly behind them. They lay down on top of the covers, still fully clothed, Arya's head on Dante's shoulder and his arm wrapped around her. It was innocent and intimate at the same time, a connection that went deeper than physical desire. I keep trying to figure out when this happened, Dante said quietly, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. When what happened? When you stopped being someone I was protecting and became someone I can't imagine losing. Arya's heart stuttered. She tilted her head to look up at him. Probably around the same time you stopped being my savior and became someone I trust with everything I am. That's terrifying. Yes, she agreed, but I'm done running from things that scare me. Dante's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I don't know how this ends, Arya. This situation with Victor, or whoever's orchestrating this, I don't know if I can keep you safe from all of it. I'm not asking for guarantees, Arya said. I'm just asking you not to shut me out. Whatever happens, we face it together. Together, Dante repeated, like he was testing the weight of the word. Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft, gentle, full of promise and fear, and something that felt dangerously close to love. When they finally broke apart, Arya settled back against his shoulder and felt his breathing slowly even out into sleep. She stayed awake a while longer, listening to his heartbeat, thinking about how much her life had changed since that disastrous wedding. She'd gone from invisible to visible, from used to valued, from alone to held by someone who looked at her like she was worth protecting at any cost. The danger was real, the threats were mounting, but for the first time in her life, Arya felt like she mattered to someone, and that someone mattered desperately to her. She must have dozed eventually, because the next thing she knew, Dante's phone was ringing and sunlight was streaming through the windows. He extracted himself carefully and answered in a low voice, moving to the window so he wouldn't wake her. But Arya was already awake, watching him through half-closed eyes. Whatever he was hearing made his entire body go rigid. "You're certain," he said sharply. "Absolutely certain?" A pause. "No, don't move on it yet. I want verification from 2 independent sources before we act. And Michael, keep this between us for now. If there's a leak, I don't want whoever's responsible to know we're on to them." He ended the call and stood staring out the window for a long moment before turning back to find Arya sitting up, fully alert. "What happened?" she asked. "Michael found something. Or rather, his team did." Dante's expression was equal parts fury and vindication. "Someone's been systematically draining money from both my organization and the Rossis for the past 6 months. Small amounts, carefully hidden in legitimate transaction flows. But it adds up to over $5 million. $5 million? Arya's eyes widened. Where did it go? That's what we're tracking now, but whoever's doing this has been very careful. The trail leads through shell companies and offshore accounts designed to obscure the final destination. He moved to sit beside her on the bed. But here's the interesting part. The theft started exactly 1 week after Victor Castellano was reported to have died in a car accident in Buenos Aires. Arya's mind raced. Reported to have died? You don't think he's actually dead? I think someone wanted us to believe he was dead while they positioned themselves to make their move. Dante's voice was cold. And I think we're about to find out who. The day became a blur of phone calls, meetings, and mounting evidence. By afternoon, Michael's team had traced the money to an account in the Cayman Islands, and from there to a property purchase in Montana under a false name. But it was the security footage from the Buenos Aires morgue that confirmed their suspicions. The body identified as Victor Castellano had the right general build and age, but dental records showed conclusively it wasn't him. Someone had staged Victor's death, using a body that was similar enough to pass a cursory inspection, then disappeared with $5 million and a vendetta. He's alive, Dante said, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. Victor's alive, and he's been planning this for months. But why kill Marcus and Vincent? Arya asked. Why not just take the money and disappear? Because money isn't enough for Victor. Dante's expression was grim. He wants what I have. He wants my empire, my reputation, my life. The theft was to fund his operation. The murders are to destroy me. Teresa spoke up from where she sat, reviewing financial documents. If he can get you and Antonio Rossi to go to war, you'll both be weakened. Then he swoops in, claims he's returned from the dead to save the city from chaos, and positions himself as the logical choice to take over. It's actually brilliant, Michael admitted grudgingly. Ruthless, but brilliant. We need to find him, Dante said, before he makes his next move. But they were already too late. The call came at 7 p.m., just as darkness was settling over the city. Marco answered his phone, listened for 30 seconds, then went pale. Boss, he said quietly, we have a situation at the warehouse on 5th Street. What kind of situation? The kind where someone left a body on our doorstep with a note pinned to their chest. The warehouse was one of Dante's legitimate shipping operations, and it was currently surrounded by police cars and crime scene tape. Dante pulled his SUV to a stop a block away and got out, Arya right behind him despite his protests. "You should stay in the car," he said. "Not happening." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded curtly. They approached the scene together, Dante's presence parting the gathered crowd like water. A detective Arya recognized from the questioning after Marcus's death looked up as they approached. "Mr. Salvatore, I was just about to call you." "Detective Morrison, what happened?" "Body was found about an hour ago by your night shift supervisor. Male, early 40s, single gunshot to the head. Same MO as the Chen and Rossi murders." "Who is it?" Dante's voice was carefully controlled. Morrison gestured to the covered form on the ground. "Robert Drake, your logistics manager. And before you ask, yes, there's a note." He handed Dante an evidence bag containing a single piece of paper with typed text. "3 down, you're next. Consider this a declaration of war. VC." Arya felt ice slide down her spine. Victor Castellano wasn't just orchestrating a frame job anymore. He was directly challenging Dante, putting his name on his crimes, daring him to respond. "Robert was one of my suspects," Dante said quietly, staring at the note. "One of the people who could have been helping Victor." "Looks like Victor got to him first," Morrison said, "probably tying up loose ends." "Or sending a message that no one is safe," Dante countered. "Detective, I need to speak with you privately." They moved away from the crime scene, and Arya watched as Dante laid out everything they'd discovered. The faked death, the stolen money, the elaborate revenge scheme. Morrison listened with growing alarm. "You're telling me a dead man has murdered 3 people to frame you for starting a mob war?" Morrison said when Dante finished. "I'm telling you Victor Castellano isn't as dead as everyone thought, and he's systematically eliminating anyone who could expose his plan while positioning me to take the fall." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "I'll need evidence. All of it. The financial records, the Buenos Aires morgue reports, everything. You'll have it within the hour. And in the meantime, I suggest you watch your back, Mr. Salvatore. If this Victor is as dangerous as you say, you're his ultimate target." They returned to the mansion under heavy security, Marco and 3 additional guards surrounding the vehicle. Arya could feel the tension rolling off Dante in waves, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. "You made a mistake," Dante said as they entered the study. "What?" "Victor made a mistake with that note. He signed it. He wanted me to know it was him, which means his ego is overriding his caution." Dante pulled out his phone. "An ego makes people sloppy." He made a series of calls, activating resources Arya could only guess at. Within an hour, his entire organization was searching for any trace of Victor Castellano in the city. Hotels, rental properties, known associates, everything was being monitored. "He has to surface eventually," Dante said, more to himself than to Arya. "He can't wage his war from the shadows forever." "What if that's what he wants you to think?" Arya said slowly. "What if he's trying to make you so focused on finding him that you miss what he's really planning?" Dante stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. "Explain." "You said Victor wants your empire, but killing people and framing you doesn't give him your empire. It just destroys it. Unless..." She trailed off, thinking. "Unless he's planning to rebuild from the ashes, to position himself as the savior who steps in when you're gone." "He'd need support for that," Dante said. "Allies within my organization willing to turn. Or allies you don't know about yet." Arya moved to the conspiracy board, studying the names and connections. "Robert Drake was one of your suspects, and now he's dead. What about the other 2? Lucia Martinez and..." She never finished the sentence. The lights went out, plunging the house into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail. "Stay behind me," Dante ordered, already moving toward the door. But before they reached it, it burst open, and Marco stumbled in, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "Breach on the north perimeter," he gasped. "Multiple hostiles. They're coming for the house." And then the shooting started. Dante grabbed Arya and pulled her down behind his desk as bullets shattered the study windows. Glass rained down around them, and Arya felt Dante's body covering hers, protecting her from the debris. The panic room, Dante shouted over the gunfire. Marco, get her to the panic room. I'm not leaving you, Arya protested. Yes, you are. Dante's face was inches from hers, his expression fierce. This is what he wants, to draw me out, to make me vulnerable by threatening you. I won't give him that satisfaction. Dante, please, Arya. I can't fight him if I'm worried about protecting you. His hand cupped her face. Trust me, I will come for you. But right now, I need you safe. Marco was already pulling her up, dragging her toward a door hidden behind a bookshelf. Arya looked back once and saw Dante standing, gun in hand, moving toward the window with the cold precision of someone who'd done this before. Then Marco shoved her into a narrow passage and sealed the door behind them, cutting off the sounds of battle and leaving Arya in darkness with only the pounding of her heart and the certainty that somewhere out there, Dante was fighting for both their lives. The panic room was small, reinforced, and equipped with monitors showing multiple views of the property. Arya watched in horror as armed figures moved through the grounds, exchanging fire with Dante's security team. She counted at least 8 attackers, maybe more, and somewhere in that chaos was Dante, facing down the man who'd already destroyed his life once and was determined to finish the job. The monitors showed Dante moving through the mansion with deadly efficiency, his security team coordinating around him like a well-trained unit. Arya pressed her hands against the screen, watching him disappear around a corner, then reappear on another camera. The gunfire had intensified, concentrated now near the east wing. Marco stood beside her, one hand pressed to his bleeding forehead, the other holding his weapon ready. He'll be all right, he said, though Arya wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. Boss has been in worse situations. How is this not the worst situation? Arya demanded, watching 2 of Dante's men take cover behind overturned furniture as bullets tore through a hallway. You didn't see what happened with Victor the first time. Marco's expression was grim. That was personal, hand to hand, brutal. This is just business. Just business. As if the armed invasion of Dante's home could be reduced to something so clinical. On the screen, one of the attackers went down, then another. Dante's team was gaining ground, pushing the invaders back toward the north perimeter where they'd breached. But Arya could see what Marco apparently couldn't. There were too many blind spots in their coverage, too many angles the cameras didn't show. And then she saw him on monitor 4, Victor Castellano, older than in the photos she'd seen but unmistakable, moving alone through the garden toward a side entrance that appeared unguarded. He carried a weapon, but moved with the confidence of someone who didn't expect to need it. There, Arya said, pointing. Marco, he's going around. He's trying to flank them. Marco cursed and grabbed the radio clipped to his belt. Boss, you have a single hostile approaching from the south garden. Looks like he's trying to circle behind your position. Dante's voice crackled back, tense but controlled. Confirmed. Keep Arya secured. I'm handling this. Boss, you can't go alone. That's an order, Marco. The radio went silent. On the monitor, Arya watched Dante change direction, moving away from his team and toward the south garden, toward Victor. He's going to face him alone, Arya said, her voice hollow. He's going to try to end this himself. It's what Victor wants, Marco said quietly. A personal confrontation. Winner takes everything. We have to help him. Our orders are to keep you safe. But Marco's hand tightened on his weapon, his eyes fixed on the monitors. They watched as Dante stepped into the garden, visible now on the exterior cameras. The shooting had stopped, an eerie silence falling over the property. Victor emerged from behind a row of hedges, and the 2 men faced each other across maybe 20 feet of manicured lawn. Arya couldn't hear what they were saying. The panic room had visual feeds, but no audio for the exterior cameras. She watched their body language, saw the tension in every line of Dante's posture, the casual arrogance in Victor's stance. Then Victor raised his weapon, and everything happened at once. Dante moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible, diving left as Victor fired. The shot went wide, tearing through the space where Dante had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. Dante came up firing his own weapon, but Victor had already taken cover behind a stone fountain. I can't just watch this, Arya said desperately. Marco, there has to be something we can do. The panic room is designed to keep you sealed in until the threat is neutralized, Marco said. There's no override from inside. Then we break out. Miss Bennett, He's out there alone, facing the man who killed 3 people to get to him. The man who tried to use me as leverage. I'm not staying locked in here while Dante risks everything. Arya turned to face Marco directly. You told me once that if I needed anything, you could help. I need you to open this door. Marco stared at her for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Then he muttered something that sounded like, "Boss is going to kill me," and moved to the control panel. "There's an emergency release," he said, "but once I trigger it, alarms go off. Everyone will know you're no longer secured. Do it." He pressed a sequence of buttons, and the heavy door began to slide open. Immediately, alarms started shrieking. Marco stepped through first, weapon raised, then gestured for Arya to follow. The mansion felt different now, violated, with shattered windows and bullet holes in walls that had stood perfect just hours ago. They moved quickly, but carefully. Marco checking each corner before allowing Arya to proceed. "What's your plan?" he asked as they navigated toward the south wing. "I don't have one," Arya admitted. "I just know I can't hide while someone I care about is in danger." They reached a set of French doors that opened onto the south garden. Through the glass, Arya could see Dante and Victor still engaged in their deadly dance, using the garden's features for cover, each trying to gain advantage over the other. "Stay behind me," Marco ordered, then pushed through the doors. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the acrid smell of gunpowder. Arya followed Marco onto the terrace, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Victor saw them first. His attention shifted from Dante for just a moment, his eyes widening in recognition when he saw Arya. And that moment was all Dante needed. He came around the fountain fast, weapon raised, and fired. The shot caught Victor in the shoulder, spinning him around. Victor's gun clattered to the ground, and he stumbled backward, clutching his wounded arm. But he was laughing. Even injured, bleeding, clearly beaten, Victor Castellano was laughing. "There she is," he said, his voice carrying across the garden. "The mysterious Arya Bennett, the woman worth destroying an empire for." "It's over, Victor," Dante said, moving closer but keeping his weapon trained. "Your team is either dead or in custody. The police have all the evidence of what you've done. There's nowhere left to run." "You think this was about running?" Victor's laugh turned bitter. "This was never about escape, Dante. This was about making you feel what I felt. Loss. Betrayal. The destruction of everything you thought was secure." "You killed your own daughter," Dante said, his voice hard as stone. "Whatever you felt, whatever you think you lost, you did that to yourself." "I did what was necessary." Victor's composure cracked, rage flooding his features. "Elena found evidence she shouldn't have found. She threatened to destroy everything I'd built. What kind of father would I be if I let her ruin herself?" "The kind who doesn't murder his own child," Arya said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Victor's eyes snapped to her, and the hatred there made her flinch. "You know nothing about sacrifice. Nothing about the hard choices that power demands. You're just another weak woman Dante thinks he can save. Just like Elena was weak. Just like everyone in this pathetic city is weak." "That's where you're wrong," Dante said quietly. "Arya is stronger than you'll ever understand. She survived being used as collateral, survived being widowed before her wedding day was over, survived being hunted by people who saw her as a pawn, and she did it without becoming the kind of monster you are." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Victor heard them too, and something desperate flickered across his face. "End of the line, Victor," Dante said. "You can surrender to me or to them, but either way, this is finished." "Nothing is finished." Victor's good hand moved with shocking speed, producing a backup weapon from his jacket. But he didn't aim at Dante. He aimed at Arya. Everything slowed down. Arya saw Victor's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Dante's expression transform from controlled fury to pure terror, saw Marco starting to move, but knowing he'd never be fast enough. The shot rang out, deafening in the quiet garden. But Arya didn't feel any pain. She was still standing, still breathing, her hands pressed to her chest in instinctive protection. It took her a moment to realize why. Dante stood between her and Victor, his body shielding hers. And Victor lay on the ground, a red stain spreading across his chest from where Dante's shot had found its mark. "No!" Arya grabbed Dante, searching frantically for injury. "Are you hit? Did he—" I'm fine. Dante's hands caught hers, steadying them. I'm fine, Arya. He missed. Marco was already moving to Victor, kicking the weapon away and checking for a pulse. He looked up and shook his head once. Victor Castellano, the man who'd orchestrated 3 murders and attempted to destroy Dante's empire, was dead. The garden filled with police and paramedics within minutes, Detective Morrison arriving with the tactical team. He took one look at the scene, Victor's body, Dante's drawn weapon, Arya standing behind him in obvious protection, and his expression said he was already writing the report in his head. Self-defense, Morrison said. It wasn't a question. He aimed at her, Dante said simply. I had no choice. We have it on camera, Marco added, gesturing to the mansion's security system. Everything, the breach, the attack, Victor targeting Miss Bennett, it's all documented. Morrison nodded slowly. All right, I'll need statements from everyone, and we'll need to review the footage. But Mr. Salvatore? He paused. I think this time, you're actually the victim in all this. The next several hours were a blur of questions, statements, and crime scene processing. Arya sat in the library, one of the few rooms that hadn't been damaged in the assault, and recounted everything to a patient officer who took careful notes. Dante was being questioned separately, as was Marco and the rest of the security team. Dawn was breaking when Detective Morrison finally found her, looking exhausted but satisfied. We've reviewed all the evidence, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Security footage, financial records, everything. It's clear Victor Castellano orchestrated the murders of Marcus Chen, Vincent Rossi, and Robert Drake as part of an elaborate revenge scheme against Mr. Salvatore. His death was justified self-defense to protect you from imminent harm. So it's over? Arya asked, barely daring to hope. The investigation will remain open for a few more weeks. But yes, the primary threat is neutralized. You're free to go about your life, Miss Bennett. Morrison stood, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for what you've been through. This was never your fight, but you handled it with remarkable courage. After he left, Arya sat alone in the library, watching the sun rise over the city. The mansion was quiet now, the chaos replaced by the careful work of cleanup crews and security teams doing damage assessment. She felt numb, hollowed out, like she'd used up every emotion over the past weeks and had nothing left to spend. Arya. She turned to find Dante in the doorway, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, now torn and stained with dirt and blood that wasn't his. He looked exhausted and achingly vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Is it really over? She asked. It's really over. He crossed to where she sat and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. Victor is dead. His team is in custody. The evidence clears both of us completely. The Rossi family has been informed of Victor's role in Vincent's death, and Antonio himself called to apologize for suspecting me. And the money he stole? Being recovered. Most of it was still in accounts we can trace. Dante's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. It's over, Arya. You're safe. We're safe. The words should have brought relief, but instead, Arya felt tears burning behind her eyes. He tried to kill me. Victor looked right at me and tried to kill me. I know. Dante pulled her down from the chair and into his arms, holding her while the shock finally broke through her numbness. I know, and I'm so sorry. I should have been faster, should have anticipated. You saved my life, Arya said against his chest. You put yourself between me and a bullet without hesitation. Of course I did. Dante's voice was fierce. Did you think I wouldn't? Did you think there was any possibility I'd let him hurt you? Arya pulled back to look at him, this complicated, dangerous, unexpectedly tender man who'd become the center of her world. When did this happen? When did I become someone you'd take a bullet for? I think it started in that parking lot, Dante said quietly. When you threw Marcus's ring at his feet and demanded an annulment. You were so angry, so fierce, so completely unwilling to be anyone's victim. I'd never seen anything like it. His hand came up to cup her face. And every day since then, you've been proving that my first impression was right. You're not someone who needs saving, Arya. You're someone worth fighting beside. I love you, Arya said, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. I know it's crazy and too fast and probably a terrible idea given everything that's happened, but I love you. Dante's expression transformed, the exhaustion and tension giving way to something that looked like wonder. It's not crazy. And it's definitely not too fast, because I fell in love with you weeks ago and have been terrified to admit it. He kissed her then, deep and sure and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Arya felt like she could breathe fully for the first time since the shooting started. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Dante stood and pulled her up with him. "Now we rebuild. Fix the mansion, repair the damage, get back to normal life. Well, as normal as life gets in my world." "Our world," Arya corrected. "I'm not going anywhere." "I was hoping you'd say that." He led her toward the windows, where morning light was painting the gardens gold despite the evidence of the night's battle. "I have a proposition for you." "Should I be worried?" "Probably." But he was smiling. "I want you to take over management of the restaurant division. Not as an employee, but as a partner. You have instincts for the business that most of my managers lack, and you understand what it means to work from the ground up." "Dante, I was a waitress. I don't have any formal training in restaurant management." "You have something better, practical experience and a genuine care for people. That's worth more than any business degree." He turned to face her directly. "I'm not offering this because of how I feel about you, Arya. I'm offering it because you're genuinely good at it. What you saw at Meridian in 30 minutes took my consultants weeks to identify." Arya felt excitement stirring beneath her exhaustion. "I want to say yes." "Then say yes." "Yes." She laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "Yes, I want to be your partner." "In business," Dante said carefully. "And in everything else?" "In everything else," Arya confirmed. The weeks that followed were a strange blend of healing and building. The mansion was repaired, the damage erased until no evidence remained of the night Victor had made his final play. The restaurants became Arya's domain, and she threw herself into the work with passionate dedication. She restructured training programs, revised menus, and personally visited every property to understand its unique challenges. Dante watched her transform from the scared woman in the parking lot to a confident businesswoman who commanded respect from seasoned professionals twice her age. She was brilliant at it, finding connections and solutions that even he had missed. The investigation into Victor's crimes officially closed 6 weeks after his death, all evidence confirming what they already knew. Marcus Chen had been killed because he'd discovered evidence of Victor's embezzlement and threatened to expose it. Vincent Rossi had died because Victor needed to create conflict between the organizations. Robert Drake had been eliminated as a loose end who could have revealed Victor's location. Antonio Rossi himself came to the mansion to formally apologize and offer alliance, recognizing that Dante had been as much a victim as his own family. The potential war dissolved into an uneasy but genuine peace. 3 months after that terrible night, Arya stood in the library and looked at the space where the conspiracy board had been. It was empty now. The walls returned to their proper purpose of holding books instead of evidence. "Thinking about everything that happened?" Dante asked from behind her. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Thinking about how different my life is now." "Better or worse?" "So much better." She crossed to him, settling into his arms. 4 months ago, I was invisible. Now, I'm a partner in a multi-million-dollar restaurant operation, living in a mansion, in love with a man who makes me feel seen every single day. 4 months ago, I was alone, Dante said quietly, running an empire but coming home to empty rooms. Now I have someone who challenges me, who understands me, who chose to stay even when staying meant danger. No regrets? Not one. He kissed her forehead. Well, maybe one. What's that? That we didn't meet under better circumstances. That you had to go through so much pain before you found your way here. Arya thought about Marcus, about the wedding that had been a lie, about the months of exhaustion and invisibility that had preceded it. I don't regret it, she said slowly, because all of that shaped who I am. And who I am is someone strong enough to stand beside you. Who I am is better because you're standing beside me, Dante countered. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the library that had witnessed so many turning points in their relationship. Outside, The city continued its endless motion. But here in this moment, everything was still and right. 6 months after Victor's death, on a spring evening when the gardens were in full bloom, Dante led Arya outside to where candles lined the pathways and soft music played from hidden speakers. "What's all this?" she asked, taking in the transformed space. "A question," Dante said, and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Arya Bennett, you walked into my life in the worst possible circumstances. You were betrayed, used, and threatened with violence. And instead of breaking, you became stronger. Instead of running, you stayed and fought. Instead of closing yourself off, you opened your heart to someone who probably didn't deserve it. Dante, let me finish." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the candlelight and threw it back in brilliant flashes. "I'm not offering you marriage to escape poverty or gain leverage. I'm offering it because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because you saw past the reputation and the power to the man underneath, and somehow decided he was worth loving." Tears were streaming down Arya's face now, but she was smiling. "Is there a question coming?" "Marry me," Dante said simply. "Not because you have to, not because it's convenient, but because we choose each other, every day, for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Arya said immediately. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like it had been made for her. And then he was kissing her while the gardens bloomed around them and the future spread out ahead like an open road. The wedding took place 3 months later, nothing like the disaster at the Riverside Community Hall. This time, Arya wore a dress that had been made specifically for her, stood in gardens she'd helped design, and spoke vows she'd written herself to a man she genuinely loved. Teresa was there, along with Sophia and Marco and all the people who'd become her found family. Antonio Rossi attended with his wife, the alliance between the organizations now solid and genuine. The restaurant managers she'd been working with came, as did Detective Morrison, who'd quietly become something like a friend. "I, Arya Bennett, take you, Dante Salvatore," she said, her voice steady and sure, "to be my husband, my partner, and my best friend. I promise to challenge you when you need it, support you always, and love you fiercely through whatever comes. You saved me when I needed it most, and now I choose to spend the rest of my life saving you right back." Dante's vows were equally simple and profound, his voice rough with emotion as he promised to protect, cherish, and honor her not as someone who needed saving, but as someone who made him want to be worth saving. When they kissed as husband and wife, Arya thought about the woman she'd been on that terrible wedding day, desperate, hopeful, willing to settle for stability, even without love. That woman felt like a stranger now. This Arya was confident, valued, deeply loved, and loving in return. She'd built a career she was proud of, found a family she'd chosen, and married a man who saw her as an equal partner in every sense. The reception was joyful and genuine, nothing like the sparse, awkward affair with Marcus. People laughed and danced and celebrated a marriage that everyone present knew was built on genuine connection rather than desperate convenience. As the evening wound down, Dante pulled Arya away from the crowds and led her to a quiet corner of the garden where they could see the lights but escape the noise. "Happy?" he asked, his arms wrapped around her waist from behind. "Deliriously," Arya said, leaning back against his chest. "You?" "More than I ever thought I had a right to be." He kissed her temple. "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me that first night, for staying when it got dangerous, for choosing to build a life with me instead of walking away when you were safe." His arms tightened. "For loving me despite knowing exactly what I am." "I love you because of what you are," Arya corrected. "You're dangerous and powerful and sometimes morally gray, yes. But you're also kind and honest, and you keep your promises. You gave me safety when no one else would, and then you gave me the freedom to choose my own path. How could I not love that?" They stood together in the garden, watching their guests celebrate, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. Dante's world would always carry risks, and Arya's new role would bring its own challenges. But they'd face those challenges together, as partners who'd chosen each other freely and completely. A year after the wedding, Arya stood in the conference room of the restaurant division's new headquarters, presenting quarterly results to the board of directors Dante had insisted she form. Revenue was up 30% across all properties, Customer satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and 3 new locations were scheduled to open in the next 6 months. The key has been remembering that restaurants are about people, not just profits, Arya explained, walking them through her philosophy. Customers who feel valued return and bring others. Employees who feel respected work harder and stay longer. It's simple, but it's often forgotten in favor of cutting costs and maximizing margins. After the meeting, Teresa caught up with her in the hallway. "You've come a long way from the scared woman I first briefed on Meridian." "I've had good teachers," Arya said, "and a partner who believes in me even when I don't believe in myself." "Speaking of your partner," Teresa said with a knowing smile, "he's waiting for you in your office." Arya found Dante sprawled in her desk chair, reading through a contract with the focused attention he brought to everything. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "How did the board meeting go?" "They approved all my proposals and asked me to expand faster." Arya settled onto the edge of her desk. "I think I've actually impressed them." "You've impressed everyone who's worked with you," Dante said. "I'm just glad they're finally catching up to what I knew from the beginning. That I'm brilliant and indispensable. That you're unstoppable when you put your mind to something." He pulled her down into his lap. "Also brilliant and indispensable." They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the silence and in each other. Arya thought about how far she'd come from that parking lot, from the woman who'd been invisible and used and desperately seeking any escape from poverty. She'd found so much more than escape. She'd found purpose, partnership, and a love that had grown from the worst circumstances into something beautiful and strong. "What are you thinking about?" Dante asked, reading her expression. "That terrible wedding," Arya admitted, "and how it led to everything good in my life now." "Even Marcus's betrayal?" "Even that. Because if he hadn't betrayed me, I never would have stormed into that parking lot. And if I hadn't been in that parking lot, you never would have offered me help." She turned to face him directly. "Every terrible thing that happened led me here, to you, to this life. I can't regret the path that brought me home." "Home," Dante repeated softly. "Is that what this is to you? What we are?" "You've been home since the moment you promised to keep me safe and actually meant it," Arya said. "Everything else, the mansion, the business, the life we've built, that's just the physical manifestation of the home we created together." Dante kissed her then, long and deep and full of the promise they'd made to each other a year ago. When they finally broke apart, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you, Arya Salvatore," he said. "I love you too, Dante." She settled back against his chest, content and certain. "And I'm going to love you for the rest of our lives." The sun set over the city beyond her office windows, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, life continued in all its messy complexity. But here, in this moment, Arya was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd gone from invisible to visible, from used to valued, from alone to deeply loved. The disastrous wedding that had shattered her old life had become the catalyst for building something far better than she'd ever imagined possible. And as Dante's arms tightened around her and the future stretched ahead full of promise and possibility, Arya knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Not just safety or stability or escape from poverty, but genuine love with someone who chose her freely, valued her completely, and saw her for exactly who she was. In the end, that was worth every terrible moment she'd endured to get here, worth the betrayal and the danger and the fear, because those moments had led her to this one, and this one was perfect.